So good afternoon, everybody. It's an absolute pleasure and a privilege to be with you this afternoon. I know that many of you have been having lunch, so I'll try to keep my presentation light and focus on the essentials. But however, we'll be speaking about recipes and ingredients, but looking at them from a different perspective. So I'll be using analogies, I'll be using references to explain something that I've been working on for the past 3 or 4 years, which has been tested a number of times, and there are colleagues here. I was very privileged to hear that they were also testing this method that I will be sharing with you. But without further ado, I'd like to share a personal thing, because well, I wouldn't say in a previous life, but in my career, I also worked. I also had the function. I also carried the responsibility of a museum director, and like other colleagues of mine, this instrument is a sort of a love-hate relationship. No, there are situations where mobile phones are problematic because of selfie sticks and no photos policy that many would tend to avoid or try to, I would say, circumvent. But as you probably know, and it's also my experience, that we tend to find ourselves in a situation where we cannot do without our mobile phone. Just think of that moment, of that particular instance when you were out to meet friends and you forget your mobile phone at home behind you and you're lost, because we have become so dependent on it that it's almost an extension of our hands. And the most pressing question at this point in time for many museums out there is, how do we harness this? I mean, you all know that there are apps and that you can download. There are very many possibilities that museums have been experimenting with, but the mobile phone is just one possible instrument that museums have at their disposal. And for traditional museums, there is a gamut of possibilities ranging from virtual reality to QR codes. In a sense, they would probably stand at two extremes of the possible spectrum of instruments and technologies that museums can make use of. So the question that I shall try to ask, which is a question that colleagues oftentimes ask me when I'm working with them or when I'm in touch with them, is what is the right technology to use? Because the choice is so vast, the possibilities are so many, and there is also an element of investment. There are funds that museums need to dedicate, and those funds are not readily available, or they have to be managed with care, as we all know. So I'll try to answer this question, not by speaking about technology, and I don't want to come across as a bit of an anticlimax being here for MuseumDigit, but to explain where the real challenge is. And I'd like to speak more about experience. What is the experience that museums are after? What type of experience do we need to create? And to explain what these experiences and how we can use technology in a strategic way, because we're going to talk about content strategy, I shall refer to recipes. I shall speak about recipes, and as you know, recipes include ingredients. There is a choice of products that would usually be handpicked to make sense in order to create a particular flavor, a particular experience as well. We need the right measure in terms of the weight, the quantity, the amount, and we also need the right temperature. So there are conditions, there are products, there are elements that together can be mixed in the right way to create a particular flavor, a particular experience. That is the analogy: flavor, experience. So if we go back to museums, then The challenge is what and how, what ingredients and how to mix these ingredients when we talk of the physical and the digital, which is where the word Figital comes into the equation. It's not a word that I've invented. I cannot take credit for it. It's a word that an Australian company has come up with in 2013, Momentum. And what I'm going to talk about is also based on extensive research that is grounded in what we call futures studies. Now, future studies, I will not go into the methodology. There is a paper that was published on Museum International that I'm happy to share at the end of my presentation. But future studies is all about harnessing the future to understand the present. It's a discipline. It's a UNESCO-recognized approach. There are also chairs in future studies or in futures literacy in various universities. And this research is based practically on this methodology. So I'm going to propose 5 scenarios, 5 possible scenarios. And I'll start with the first scenario. And the first scenario is the physical with a digital presence. It's a mix of physical and digital, but the emphasis is much more on the physical. And to give an example, for you to understand better what I'm talking about, I'm going to refer to something that happened a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, which is something that many museums have been doing over the past months and years, which is about making accessible databases, cataloging information, classified, structured in a particular way that is made accessible to the public out there. Now, this information is data, a richness of data, but at the end of the day, this is the case of the Louvre. And the Louvre, a few months ago, probably a year or so, made available its databases to the general public, and you can download anything. It's a treasure trove for researchers, but I would like to share, I wouldn't call it a provocation, but I would like to invite you to think about what this data is all about, because this data is mostly about bricks. It's about brick collecting. And when we're going to build something, be it a house, a monument, whatever structure, whatever piece of architecture we're going to build, we need the materials. We need the bricks. We need the data. So what really matters at this point in time, when we look at this Figital scenario, is what's going to happen with this data, what we're going to build, what we're going to construct. It's not about the brick collecting, which is available, and that is what most researchers do. They use those resources to build, to create papers, to write scientific papers, and so on and so forth. But it's also about what, for example, creatives can come up with when accessing this information. I just want to mention the case of the Rijksmuseum, which made accessible all their information, all their cataloging online, and it was made available to creatives to create so many beautiful things. You can find YouTube videos that explain what was produced, and they also created a sort of a competition in terms of the potential products that can be created thanks to this resource. So that's one scenario. I'd like to take you to the other end now, and I'd like to invite you to think about the digital with a physical presence. So the overwhelming presence of the digital, but in any case, come what may, even something that is entirely digital or almost will always have a physical presence because it's there for human consumption and will always be physical. I'd like to share this interesting case study for you to understand what I'm talking about here. This is known as the Museum of Portable Sound. It is a mobile. All the experience is on a mobile, and you can access that experience from anywhere. Okay? The curator, the collection, which is mostly sound, although there is a version of it or a small component of it that includes physical objects, but there are only 15 or 20. The vast majority, and you can look it up, you can access this museum even now as you're following what I'm saying about this museum. The whole experience is online. And this is one of those museums that did very well, obviously, during the COVID-19 pandemic, because there was no need to function or to remain relevant from behind closed doors, because the doors were virtual and they were never closed. So in between these two scenarios, these two, I wouldn't call them extremes, but these two opposites, there are three other scenarios. There is the second scenario, which is about the digital as a pointer to the physical. Now, there are also quite a few museums that are tapping into this scenario. And as a case study, I'd like to mention virtual tours, an experience that points to the physical to the physical version. Virtual tours were something that, for example, during COVID were quite in demand, but there is research also that clearly explains that they were not a replacement, they can never be, because at the end of the day, virtual tours lack the multisensoriality of a museum experience. When we go to a museum, it's not about the visual, about looking. It's about much more. It's about the soundscape, it's about the ambient, it's about a multisensorial experience that is probably not as present, not as dominant, but which is also part of what we experience when we are visiting. Now, these virtual tours have been evolving, and the latest versions, I would call them versions. This is something that the Hood Museum of Art in Dartmouth, USA has been experimenting with, for example, is a combination of many things. Because, think about it. The virtual museum is a copy-paste of the physical. The captions are exactly the same as you would find them when you are visiting the real thing. And the potential to go beyond that particular experience of a copy-paste, also without the multisensorial element of things, is huge. There is much more possibility there. But this is an experience that can serve as a visiting card, something that you can test, something that you can access to, and then which can take you to understand and to experience the real thing. The third scenario is about the experience that is an extension now, an experience that could begin in the physical or in the digital and move into the physical. And as an example, I can share what many of us have experienced during the COVID-19 pandemic. And this is the Getty Challenge, where the Getty challenged the whole world, to pick a painting, to choose a painting, and to engage with this painting. Now, that is an interesting choice. There is a publication that the Getty have also published, but there is research that is still missing, in my opinion, because what really happened here is what we call visual literacy. The idea that people were looking at paintings, reading paintings, studying, analyzing. Some of them actually replicated them in extraordinary ways. Others were inspired by these paintings. And it would be interesting, and I'm also inviting my colleagues who are doing research in this field to perhaps look into the possibility or look into how we can understand whether there was a repeat, a loop here, whereby those who chose those paintings went then afterwards to visit the museum. But the experience was extended. It was something that was happening, was looking out of the museum and would begin at home, particularly in these circumstances. The fourth scenario, which is where museums are heading, although there are very few that are experimenting with this scenario, is the equilibrium between the digital and the physical. And this is, in other words, what we define transmedia. The idea that an experience can be split in between different media, whereby something can begin in the digital, then move into the physical, then back into the digital, and so on and so forth. I have a slide which summarizes this thinking, which is coming from media studies. So in the traditional way, the slide refers to the old world, the old way of doing things, It's three different experiences that are disjointed, separate. But when we look at how transmedia thinking can inform new experiences, it's about how the movie, the game, in this case, and the book can work together. So when you experience all three of them, your understanding of what the museum, in this case, would be offering is richer than if you experience the single element. So a museum that could become a book, a museum that could become a gamification experience, and so on and so forth. There are not very many museums that are looking at this possibility. We're still at the beginning of something that, in my opinion, could be very exciting. There is the Australian Centre for the Moving Image in Australia, in Melbourne, and there is also the National Museum in Matera that has experimented with this transmedia approach. Let me try to explain how it would work. And I'm going to call to help me Harry Potter here. So Harry Potter would start off as books, as 7 books. No? And then these books would become film, a film plus 1, 8. If you remember reading the book first, you would have a particular understanding of who Harry Potter and the plot, what the plot is all about. If you had to watch the film first, you would have an understanding of what the character and the plot is nonetheless. But when you engage with both, you have a richer understanding, a more complete understanding of the Harry Potter universe, okay? Which would include also merchandising, would include the Harry Potter world, and so on and so forth. So when we talk of a museum of the future and how we can harness the potential that the digital provides us with, it's a question of a universal experience, a multifaceted experience that can, and I'm going to go back, that can replicate this visual of the new world, the new way of looking at things. Now, at the beginning of my presentation, I chose to try to answer a question. And I did share that question, and I'm going to go back to it in my notes and read it once again for you. What is the right technology? What should we invest in? And I think that the answer is that we should invest in the technology that works best for our context, is the one that serves a clear purpose, is the one that provides us with the right flavor, going back to recipes, is the one that provides us with the best fit and the right mix between the physical and the digital. So if we go back to our analogy referring to recipes, then our recipe might be something similar to what I'm sharing with you on my screen. It could be 60% scenario 4, 20% scenario 3, and a sprinkle of scenario 1. It's a question of understanding what this mix is all about. And that has to come from a clear understanding as to who our public is, understanding these personas that stands for the demographics of our public, present and future. Because at the end of the day, publics are not cast in stone, they change, they are subject to different pressures, influences, and so on and so forth. There are demographics that change regularly, so we need to be very careful about that. So at the end of the day, we need to understand what we're going to cook, what type of digital content strategy we're going to cook. And to wrap up my presentation, I think that this template is clearly indicating that we have to start with the objectives first. What do we want to achieve? What do we want, how do we want to engage with our public? And then understand what tools we need in our toolbox to engage with our public. It could be the same technology. It could be the same, it could be a QR code, but used in different ways, used in strategically different ways to engage with a different type of scenario. The most important thing, however, is to understand the objective. I'd like to close also with a short note by referring that the model has been published, as I did mention. The paper was published also on Museum International in 2022. It's being reviewed and stress tested, and hopefully there will be other iterations using also design thinking to understand how this model can better inform museums and their content strategy. Thank you.